This is Samantha and Zessie.
It's your boy, Ramoy George Phillip the First.
And this is Maskulinity. Welcome back. Ramoy, I have been having a major issue with an obsession with a reality TV show, which I don't really watch reality TV.
Shut up. Everybody watches reality TV.
No, I really don't. I'm obsessed with Marvel movies, and I watch
you're the worst.
Oh, whatever. I watch like How to Get Away with Murder and like anything that's like
that
overly
show.
Dramatic. Anyway, but the reality TV show that I'm obsessed with is Are You the One on MTV. And it's amazing because, have you heard of it? I think you have.
Can I say something about this?
Yes, please.
MTV, probably very problematic. I'm assuming. Growing up, it probably programmed me with some really bad ideologies and expectations around gender, sex, and everything in between. Really fucked me up, probably, retrospectively, thinking about it.
Perhaps.
Yeah, but this Are You the One is the shit.
Isn't it amazing? Oh my God. So you guys, if you haven't watched Are You the One on MTV,
I can't believe we're promoting MTV right now. Even though we did earlier with Imran, but whatever.
No, what we're promoting here is an exercise and an exploration into relationships, which is perfect for what we're about to get into, right? It's like however many, 22 strangers. I mean, this season it's what, like 16 strangers, because everybody's gender fluid, have been analyzed by relationship experts or whatever. Ramo has air quotes, but whatever, they're probably experts. And basically they're trying to find their match in the house. And if everybody finds their perfect match in the house, they win $1 million. And I love it. I really love it. So what's your favorite thing about the show?
There's these two bro-y dudes that are super muscly, but they're completely in love, kind of. And it's just fun to watch these two just muscly, brolicky dudes just like have passionate makeout sessions and like
cute.
just be just in those honeymoon stage of romance.
It's awesome.
And it's cute as F. A-F. Cute A-F. Shout out to you, Justin and Max, even though I don't know about you, Justin. You're kind of tricky.
But anyway, you guys, if you haven't watched the show, it's really great. And actually, it's a perfect kind of a study of relationships. And especially this current one is all gender fluid. So everybody loves everybody, no matter the genders. And so it's a really interesting thing, which is kind of a perfect segue for us because, you know, we closed out last module with a little mini field study to gain some different perspectives. And our last module was about sex, but, you know, we're getting into some new things starting today. But before we do that, just want to do a little debrief, you know? And, you know, what was interesting about talking to Elsha, Jason, and Jesselyn about sex and their understanding of sex is that it really kind of confirmed how family, whether it's the structure of family or the culture of families, you know, really can be the biggest influencer of our understanding of sex. But then it also seems that we receive so much messaging that either perpetuates or completely thwarts those previously set expectations. So it seems like what really repeatedly came up was this notion that certain traits that are deemed positive in some humans are sometimes aligned with masculinity. I think that we had that moment a few times with Jason, which I thought was really interesting because it really speaks to, you know, the performance of masculinity. I think right now we're talking a lot about toxic masculinity. And so the performance of masculinity isn't always negative, you know, like there are a lot of different like virtuous qualities that are aligned with it. But we always have to ask ourselves, is it helpful? Like some of the traits that came up, for example, were genuineness, strength, clear-headedness, like being aligned with masculinity rather than just being a good human, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, one thing that kind of seemed clear is that whether or not we are conscious of it, there is a level to which living in a male-dominant culture plays a role in our sex lives, given that it like influences the way we receive mainstream messaging through books and media and TV about sex, the ways that education systems inform us about sex, and how, you know, even our family structures inform our sex lives.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And so, you know, the sex module is actually a really good way to set things off in this season because so much of the way that we understand gender is relative to sex and the act of sex. But now we're actually going to move on to another aspect in this next set of episodes, and we're really going to take a look at the ways that the performance of masculinity affects our relationships.
He said, moving on. So I'm going to take an exit. I'm going to go eat a sandwich.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll be right back.
I ate already, so I'm just going to stay here and talk to these people. We're conscious that the most quintessential aspect of the gender binary, outside of it being lined up along the sexes, is really the assumption that masculinity, in a lot of ways, means being less emotionally expressive or even just less emotional than femininity. And so we'll be talking about that, and we'll be talking about how, along with what can be qualified as stoicism, dominance and physicality, and as the other pillars of the performance of masculinity do play out. So this module, we're going to have a guest, Robert Candell, who actually has his own show called Tough Love, where he shares a bit of an old school take with a new set of eyes, which is really kind of cool because he gets really into how relationships used to be between men and women, how they are now, and how men expressing themselves more and kind of giving space for the partner to be heard, but also for themselves to be more expressive can really lead to a whole new and juicy relationship. So it'll be interesting to get his perspective. We're also going to talk to some strangers, like similar to the way that we did in the last episode, about how their understanding of gender roles has impacted their relationships, be it romantic or otherwise. Though I'm be real, as a hopeless romantic, we're probably mostly going to focus on romance. And then finally, we're going to have a bit of a treat for you guys that will allow us to get a little bit more creative about the way that we want to explore this topic. But before we get there, let's just do a little bit of level setting, right? Because we really want to get real about what's at stake in this conversation. We're really at a pivotal moment in society right now where many of us are questioning the way that we've been doing things, the way that we've been treating to each other. When it comes to gender and the performance of masculinity, we didn't even have these concepts before, right? Like, how much were we really talking and thinking about masculinity, where you could like log on to Google or go to New York Times and you would have articles that talk about masculinity and gender. It wasn't a whole lot. There wasn't a lot of that going on before. So we didn't really have the language. We didn't really have access to calling things out. Because honestly, it's so ingrained and for such a long time was so invisible as part of the programming that we kind of mostly all have, that it really took, and honestly, it's continuing to take a large level of discomfort. And honestly, mostly from the people who are on the receiving end of some of the bad treatment, essentially coming from this dynamic, speaking out about that discomfort, which honestly stems mostly from the mask, right? The big mask of masculinity. So it really took that to really start asking some questions. I mean, honestly, it wasn't until people started calling masculinity toxic that people really started to take notice at this pervasive and ever-present phenomenon. And I mean, we do mean on a mainstream level, okay? Because people have been fighting for the humanity for a long time. Like, people have been fighting for equality for a long time. But the fact that we're looking at this on this mainstream level, it's pretty impressive and it's kind of new. So given that we've lived with this norm for so long, it's important for us to give each other the space and give ourselves some grace as we tackle the ins and outs of it. You know, we're still going to be making mistakes, and so we kind of have to give ourselves a little bit of room to make mistakes and kind of grow from this. So now that may be heard as we're giving people passes, even though they're acting out because they didn't know better at the time, or like we lived under different notions when these things happen. But then in the same breath, I think it's really important to reiterate that accountability and compassion can, and in my opinion, in fact, should exist in the same space. So as we give ourselves some space to make mistakes in this conversation, let's also hold ourselves accountable, right? So in that vein, we really want to take a deeper look at these traits that, you know, we started out this season talking about the pillars of the performance of masculinity. So to reiterate them, we're talking about stoicism, dominance, physicality, and addiction. And we've got a special dude in the house, you know what I mean, who we're going to be bouncing all of this off of, you know, and it is none other than our very own connector of experiences, shatterer of masculinity with a hard K, summertime, Brooklyn Park Hooper, RGP1, Ramoy Phillip the first, the only of his name. Ramoy, welcome to your own show. Thank you for being in the hot seat. We're going to just dissect this a bit and just want to thank you for...
Oh my God, I can't believe I'm on the Maskulinity podcast. I'm here. It's finally happened. I just had a vegan BLT sandwich.
Ooh. Vegan
mayo.
Nice.
Tempeh bacon.
Oof.
I'm ready to do this.
Okay, good.
Listen, I'm here, y'all.
I'm glad that you're...
Swish, swish.
Glad you're here. Swish, swish. Well, awesome. So, the first thing we're going to get into is I have so many questions for you, Ramoy, and I know we've talked about this.
I'm not liking this side already. I'm stressing and I'm sweating.
Well, I think it's funny because what happens for me a lot is when I talk about the show and I'm like, yeah, I have a podcast on masculinity. I get the look, right? People are just really? You do? And I have to use you as my co-sign, be like, oh no, but I have a dude co-host, and
I'm a dude now.
Oh, okay. I mean,
I'm the dude.
I'm
the dude that is being used.
You're
it's kind of flipping the switch.
A human person. And so I think that, it's really helpful for you to actually talk about this on a more personal level, because I think a lot of times you can get kind of, theoretical on this show, and I think it's great that we can actually have this conversation openly and concretely. So let's get into it.
I'm ready for it.
Awesome. All right. So given that men and masculine identified folks are expected to keep up this facade, and this is really an opportunity for you to be yo, that's not true. Where are you coming from with that? Or be you know what? This is true. So as I'm talking about keeping up this facade of consistent emotional clarity and sobriety, right? It feels like the expectation is that dudes just don't have feelings. Maybe they just don't actually have feelings. Maybe dudes are able to just move on with their lives when stuff happens and they just let it roll off their back. But I feel we're here every week begging to differ. And I feel as you've mentioned on the show, you haven't always been up on game about the masculinity, right? I feel you've grown in that conversation. And so I feel if we start with stoicism, for example, in the context of relationships, is that something that's shown up in your own relationship? First of all, is it, before we get there, do you deal with stoicism? And if so, how's that shown up in your relationships? Is this something you can actually relate to?
You ask it it's has it shown up in my relationship as it was a past tense thing? It shows up every fucking day in my life.
Oh.
Still to this day.
Mm.
Did you watch The Wonder Years?
That's the one with Ben Savage?
His brother, Fred Savage.
Yes.
Yeah, Fred Savage.
Yes. I watched it in French, though, so I don't remember it well. But yes. Yep.
So the dad, Dan Lauria, Jack Arnold, would come home every day from work, throw his keys on the table, sit down his briefcase. When anybody asked him, his kids, his daughter, his sons, his wife would ask him a question, he'd just grunt, and he'd say, work is work. And that is what was the model for my life. I think the 90s, and my grandfather similarly just came home, didn't say much, and just watched TV, watched the news, ate his dinner. That's what was modeled for me. What? So that kind of stoicism of just I just don't have the capacity to talk about my emotions or anything still plagues me.
Wow. So that was so would you consider that to be I don't want to say model, but model?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So then how did that impact your relationships?
Every partner I've ever asked is why don't you talk more? Can you just talk about not how you're feeling, just
talk.
Talk.
Just talk in general.
I'm just yo, what do you want from me? Let a man live. Let a man live in his own head. That's all I want to do.
But wait, so in those moments though, is it you don't want to talk because you're I don't have nothing to say? My brother used to say that all the time. I would be yo, so, hey, he would just be I mean, I don't talk because I don't have anything to say. And I would be but you're so great and so fun and so awesome. I'm sure you have stuff to say. And he would just be nah. Is that?
Yeah, I don't know what it is about that, because I have I don't know about you, brother, and I don't know about, I just my brain's talking to itself all the time, and then when it comes to talking out loud, I'm I've already talked about it in my own head, I've already processed this shit, or or I say as little as possible because I've been talking about it internally so much that I expect everybody else to just kind of be with it.
Okay.
And I don't think and I think a lot of the modeling that we did see just didn't give us the tools to say it's okay to be expressive verbally. Like I'm completely expressive internally.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like verbally giving us the clearance to be like, yo, you can talk about whatever, anything, good, bad, nonsensical, random, valueless. You can talk about it, let it out.
Yeah, like that outward expression.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we're gonna get a little deep, we're gonna get a little deep. So, like, I'm wondering, so has that ever caused like a rift?
All the time, every day of my damn relationship life.
Oh my God.
Jesus. What do you people want from men? What is wrong with masculinity?
I mean, I think it's interesting you say that because, yeah, I was going to try to relate on some level of like, yeah, I deal with it too, but I do not. I mean, I have trouble expressing things sometimes, but it doesn't come from a model of like watching women or people who look like me just like not say shit. You know what I mean? Because like I have literally never experienced that. And I'm not trying to say like on some like stereotypical like women just like talk more, but the programming is different. And so I experienced something different from my like older men in my life that I watched growing up. And I think that in a lot of ways it had to do with the fact that I was a daughter or a granddaughter or a niece where they likely interacted with me differently or something like that, which is interesting. And I think that, well, actually, let's kind of like live there for a second, because one of the things I want to touch on, and I hope this isn't too deep, but like one of the episodes that we had last season, we talked to our resident therapist, Justin Leoy. Shout out to Justin, who explained that, many people who reached out to him were actually partners of the men that he would eventually work with, because it couldn't seem to emotionally connect. And so, I mean, I know you touched on it a little bit, but I want to piggyback on that because there's a level to which the way that you're describing it doesn't necessarily sound like you're bottling shit up. I mean, maybe you are, but that's not the feeling that I got from what you just said. It doesn't sound like you're bottling shit up necessarily because you're processing everything and you're like done with it. And I also wonder if there are times where that kind of like non-expression or like that void of expression leads to some type of buildup. Because one of the things we talked about was, Yuval Moses, our very first episode of Masculinity, we talked about trauma, but we also talked about just like mental health and, dealing with certain things. And even with Justin, just like not like verbaling or like letting that live outside of us. And I wonder if in kind of some of the stoicism that you experience, if there is sometimes that impact of it kind of like creating some form of maybe not mental illness or mental issue, but just some type of like constraint.
Yeah, I think like whether it's Justin or Yuval in the past or just conversations we've had in general, like because of the modeling and the programming we have constantly around us. When I say that, what are we talking about? Just to repeat ourselves. It's like stories that we see constantly that inform like how we perform in this world or how we act in this world. So like from the male characters that we see constantly all around us, we constantly download this kind of unconscious way of being. And so like how I fall prey to that in this particular conversation is, I don't talk much. I don't express my emotions in that way because from what I've seen, it's this unfortunate cycle. From what I've seen is like men don't communicate and therefore they're not expected to communicate in this way. And then if they do, it's interpreted as like weak or like pussy shit or like don't be a bitch, excuse the French, and stuff like that, right? And so when you see that and you see kind of how it has been interpreted as per that programming, you just unconsciously decide not to communicate those emotions, and it then perpetuates this cycle of then you judging other people who may be male or male-oriented or men who then communicate in a certain way as being weak, right? Or as being just lesser than male or masculine. And so then it's this vicious cycle of sorts. But then it does lead to these very negative byproducts, and the way that has happened in my life is like, at times I'll just explode, and this anger just erupts out of me. I'm just like, and if I had just been more diligent in my practice of trying to be more communicative of emotions, or communicative of just my general feelings or thoughts in general, and then being heard on the regular, and then which would then challenge the fact of me feeling not being heard because innately I haven't been communicating, it would have then probably caused less of these anger outbreaks that seem so regular for me and men of all capacities.
So I have a question on that, because I think that one thing that you're touching on right here is expression of a feeling as weakness, right? Just like the notion of vulnerability being weak. And I guess to kind of build on what you're talking about in terms of like that eruption of anger, I'm wondering if in that moment, if it feels like a relief, or if it feels like when you actually, I mean, regardless of the fact that like it's coming out through the emotion of anger, well, I don't want to say regardless, but the fact that you're actually finally able to voice what you've been feeling, does that provide you with relief? Does it make you feel powerful? Like, is there somewhere where you get some solace and it allows you to then kind of like filter that into future interactions with your partners, or, does that make sense?
I mean, definitely all the above. It allows me to feel relief and strength and power, because it's all in a sense of a power-filled emotional response. So yeah, in that sense, completely. The other part, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, I mean, like, I guess for the next time, like, does it allow you to be able to be more emotionally expressive for the next time? Like, afterwards, like, you don't let it build up or something. I don't know.
No, I mean how much... just perpetuates the same cycle of repression, and then leads to explosion. And then, so you have to be actively trying to combat that by being more, allowing yourself to be more expressive and communicative. And
I'm wondering, so there's like a partner on the other side of that, right? And so, like, what has been, like, do you feel like partners in relationships, I mean, in your case, a feminine partner,
unless you're like Bosset, like, I'll hang out with you, Bosset.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll hang out with Bosset too. It's amazing. Do you feel like a feminine partner can? Well, I don't. Because what I was gonna say is like, do you feel like a feminine partner is like going to like help you kind of be able to like pull that out? But I think, yeah, to your point, it's kind of like up to you to choose to really let that out, regardless of like the space is. I think there can be like an invitation to be more emotionally expressive and be more vulnerable. But it sounds like from what you're saying that it's like a decision or a turning point, like Greg Parlow was saying, where you choose to then start to express yourself more on a consistent basis, such that it's not just, like an eruption, but that comes from you, essentially. It's not something that's like caused by somebody else who's kind of like drawing it out of you, if you will.
Yeah, I think, a partnership and a relationship of any sort is, you're there to, a part of the partnership is like to help support the other person in that partnership, right? But then it's also up to you, and there's 100% responsibility on you yourself to be holding up your end of the partnership, and that is to be better and to grow and to be a better partner. Mm-hmm. And that takes work, especially when it comes to like emotional work, personally, and it takes a lot of dedication. But it also takes forgiveness from the other person and understanding. And so it's that equal kind of parts of like you're putting in the work and your partner is giving you the grace and the space to be better, and also trying to support you in that. And you're, in and of yourself, you're doing the work to be a better partner and support your partner. So
I feel that. And I feel like it calls also for forgiveness of the self. And to piggyback on that, I just really think it's important to unpack, because, in a relationship with someone, at least if you want to have a connected and balanced partnership, right? Authentic communication is really key. But honestly, I think, as we start getting into this relationships module, it's important to understand kind of like we've talked a lot about the like where our notions of gender come from, but like institutionally, relationships started out as a union so that they like people could help one another survive. And so then that evolved into, romantic relationships being used in traditions for various things like marrying off your child in certain cultures, building a legacy, generally tending to various factors and outcomes that actually lived outside of the relationship itself, which actually contributed to a larger system. So if we're looking at that in that light, it kind of makes sense how we ended up like using gender roles to essentially contribute to like a systemic type of relationship, or systemic or systematic, whatever you guys know what I mean. Like a systemic type of relationship that served a higher purpose than just a partnership between two people. And I think like thinking in line with like the dominance pillar, for example, as the masculine half of a relationship, did you have like a moment where you thought yourself as the person in the relationship that should be pleased?
Yeah, I think I thought a lot of like I grew up in the church and conservative programming, and there was like this there was this rhetoric around like the husband or the father serves the household and serves his wife and is there to sacrifice everything for his wife. But in the same vein, the wife was there to please the husband and to serve the husband. And it almost, the way that it's modeled in a lot of Western conservative cultures is that, in a way, unfortunately, puts it in like an inferior and superior kind of relationship. And the man in those relationships is superior and the woman is a little bit inferior and they're to serve. And it is very unfortunate. But at times, yeah, because of that programming, even though I thought of myself very kind of emo and young and progressive and like sensitive and I loved rom-coms and I was the romantic as a kid, it still led to me being, whether consciously or unconsciously, at times feeling like there's an expectation where I need to be served or I need to be pleased, whether that's like, just at a kitchen table or in the bedroom. Like it's absurd to say, but at times, yeah, because of programming, because of ideology, is like, there was definite times where I thought I, as the man or the male in a relationship, thought I needed to be pleased. I was there to be served or be pleased.
Well, I think it's great the way that you kind of frame that in the sense that you're like, oh, I was like a sensitive person and like I like rom-coms and things like that. And so, like the conscious or the unconscious piece of it, I think is a really important thing to really draw out because, I think as we're having these conversations about masculinity, gender roles and all of these things, like we've mentioned on the show before, it's like we talk about like nice guys, for example, right? There's like a separation between, men who perform this like toxic masculinity and then like dudes who are like, no, not all men. Like this is not what I do and all of this stuff. And it's like, the framing around the fact that it's not a conscious choice to be someone who wants to dominate over over another, like for every single person. It's like a narrative that we continually perpetuate in every single interaction because we are functioning as part of a larger system, right, that has taught us kind of these ways to behave and act with one another. And so I think that it's really important to point that out, that like, just because like in relationships specifically, there are different ways to interact with one's partner that subscribe to different notions of the performance of masculinity, but that aren't conscious, right? And I think it's interesting and tough, but also kind of necessary to take a look at our behaviors and pay attention to the ways that we kind of like see those systems at play within our everyday actions, and not just say like, oh, this is something that's outside of me, which I think, it sounds like you had like some point of reckoning or some point of like understanding where that came to the fore for you. And I kind of wonder what that was like. Like, I know that it's something that's kind of I mean, you mentioned this like a continuous thing, right? That it's not just like you figured it out and now it's over. It's like a current thing that, you kind of have to work on every day and continue to grow. But I feel like there is a point in your story where you may have started to have like a moment where you started to question it more and started to be more active in making decisions that were more workable. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, if people don't know why I wanted to be a part of this podcast when you asked me to be part, but like growing up as a kid, like my mom was in an abusive relationship, both sexually, physically, and emotionally. And throughout my young adulthood years, I had friends who were sexually abused, female friends specifically that were sexually abused. And they were comfortable enough to confide that information and those terrible experiences with me. And then I just kind of swore in my early years I'd never become this monster of a man who would abuse a person or demand something of a person that they were not willing to give of their own volition, right? But then in my 20s, like something happened, whether it was like ego. No, a lot of it had to do with ego and insecurity, and then also modeling some negative behaviors that I had grown up with, like we've already been talking about. I began to perpetuate some very negative, very caustic traits and hurt people, both emotionally and physically, or no, not physically, but predominantly emotionally, just being emotionally abusive towards partners or being very critical or judgmental or like subjecting people to feeling inferior because I thought I was superior. And then at some point, thank God I have like some piece of self-awareness, like it caught up to me and I was like, what the fuck kind of hypocrite are you, dog? And then it was just like, I think a lot of it had to do with heartbreak. Like my heart got broken in a relationship, and then I was confronted with a lot of that ego that I had so willingly played kind of willfully ignorant towards. And that hypocrisy just shone a bright light in my face. And then I just started confronting it, just learned that it was incredibly important for myself to be always honest with myself. And so that internalization that kind of helped, just kind of the internal and woke in my own brain space. And now I just call myself on my bullshit when I'm full of bullshit. I don't know.
I mean, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, it takes something, I think, to hold yourself accountable in that space, especially because it sounds like you're doing a lot of the work internally. And, you had like, pretty specific external circumstances that caused you to think that. And it's great that you had the wherewithal to get there rather than as being celebrated by partners. And if that is like, if that was positive reinforcement or if that was kind of like something that made you feel a certain type of way.
Yeah, I don't think for myself I've ever like resorted to that as like a alternative source of like reinforcing my masculinity or like finding a way to compensate or redirect my kind of lack of emotional response or emotional freedom into that kind of physicality. I feel, though, that it's very common in our culture to do that because, again, there is so much modeling of being physically strong and going to the gym or just bulking up and being brolic and diesel as fuck. And, like, so potentially it could be a common occurrence in many male or masculine identifying individuals to, like, again, redirect this lack of having the space for emotional response and redirect that kind of energy into I'm going to go to the gym and just flex like fuck for hours on end and then come off and look tough and feel more valuable in my masculinity, right? Versus just digging deep and allowing themselves to be more vulnerable, aka feminine in this context, but not really. It's like a compensatory measure that can be utilized as a tool to kind of not deal with certain things and redirect energies elsewhere.
It's funny how energy can be sometimes. But yeah, cool. Well, listen, thank you, Ramoy, for your insights.
I'm going to go eat some fries. I'll see y'all later.
Okay, thanks. Great. So you heard it here first from RGP1. And we're just going to continue to explore more of these themes throughout this modules, right? Like really just get to the heart of how the type of thinking that says that performing masculinity is just something that we can get away from, like how that actually plays against having the relationships that we sometimes say we really want. And sometimes it doesn't. But a lot of times it does. And so we know that it really takes a lot of courage, and it's not easy to leave behind all the ways of being that we've inherited. And we're trying nonetheless. So we appreciate that you're trying with us, that you're listening to this conversation. And we'd love to hear how you feel about that. We're starting the relationships module. So this is really the best time for you to send your questions, your comments, your concerns, your suggestions, the things that you want us to talk about on this show. Please do hit us up at maskulinitypodcast@whoistheo.com. As always, you can find us via the social medias at Masculinity Podcast on Facebook, Masculinity Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, we always spell masculinity with a K. So thank you guys so much for listening, being part of this conversation. My name is Samantha Nzesi. Romoy, can you just say bye?
It's your boy, more George Philip D. first.
All right. Thank you. And this has been Maskulinity. Thanks for listening.
Peace.
Ciao.